Imagine you're standing in a royal court more than 2,000 years ago. Not on a battlefield, not on horseback, in a room full of ministers, ledgers, and messengers with dust on their sleeves. Outside, kingdoms are bleeding each other dry. Every campaign costs grain. Every march costs time. Every victory costs more than most rulers can afford. And in the corner of the room, there's a strategist who isn't looking at the map like everyone else. He's looking at the supply lines, the harvest schedule, the treasury, because he knows something the king refuses to admit. The enemy isn't always the army in front of you. It's the bill that comes after. Now, fast forward to today. You open your phone. The headlines are screaming, "Assets frozen, banks cut off, exports banned, sanctions expanded." And suddenly, a country doesn't collapse from invasion. It collapses due to a lack of access. No missiles, no tanks, just denial, just friction, just the invisible pressure of a system designed to drain you until you comply. Here's the machine we're dissecting today. Deny access, raise cost, fracture cohesion, force compliance, or exhaustion. That isn't modern, it's ancient. Welcome to Sun Tzu's real battlefield. Today we're not talking morality, we're not talking politics. We're talking about a strategy so efficient it replaced armies with paperwork. Welcome to the sanctions playbook. Most people know Sun Tzu through memes. They treat him like a philosopher of victory, a mystical thinker who unlocked the psychology of conflict. But that version misses the point. Sun Tzu wasn't obsessed with winning battles. He was obsessed with avoiding expensive battles. Not because he was gentle, because he was calculating. He lived in an era when war scaled into a national expense. Armies weren't just warriors. They were moving cities. Food, metal, labor, transport, taxes rising, farms emptying, markets tightening. Every time a ruler sent an army out, he was taking out a loan against his future. And Sun Tzu saw what most rulers refused to see. Prolonged war doesn't just kill soldiers, it kills the state. That's why his most famous line is not poetry, it's accounting. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Translation: get the outcome you want without paying the full price. That is not ancient philosophy. That is modern sanctions. Let's name the evolution. Old war was physical. New war is systemic. Old war destroyed bodies. New war destroys capacity. If you want to weaken a rival today, you don't need to take their capital city. You need to take their access to capital, access to clearing, access to technology, access to replacement parts, access to insurance, access to shipping, access to markets. Modern power doesn't just fight armies. It shapes the environment those armies depend on. And the logic is straight out of Sun Tzu. Because Sun Tzu didn't teach hit harder. He taught win cheaper, win longer, win without letting the enemy choose the battlefield. The economic siege engine. Sanctions are a trap because they don't have to be perfect. They only have to do one thing: make every move more expensive. Not impossible, expensive. When the cost of functioning rises high enough, the target starts eating itself. Inflation pressure, currency pressure, shortages, substitution, corruption, black markets, elite infighting, public fatigue, capital flight. The regime doesn't lose a battle. It loses time, and time is the most expensive enemy. Sun Tzu would recognize this instantly, because his central warning wasn't, "Don't fight." It was, "Don't bleed your own treasury to prove a point." Now, let's break down the sanctions machine the way Sun Tzu would. Not as diplomacy, as coercion engineering. Most people think war begins with soldiers. Sun Tzu begins with supplies. Because logistics don't support strategy. Logistics are strategy. If the enemy can't move food, metal, fuel, and tools, the army becomes irrelevant. Sanctions are modern logistics warfare. Instead of blocking roads with armies, you block payments, insurers, exporters, shipping access, licensing rights, critical components. The target can still exist, but it can't function normally. It becomes a state that spends its life solving shortages, and every shortage is a distraction tax. Sun Tzu warned that distance multiplies cost, that prolonged campaigns drain the base, that feeding an army from home ruins the treasury. Sanctions do the same thing, but to an entire economy. They force the target to feed itself through longer routes, worse deals, riskier partners. The pressure isn't dramatic, it's constant. Here's the key. Sanctions are not designed to destroy. They're designed to drain. The most effective weapon doesn't destroy. It drains. Drain the currency through import costs. Drain industry through replacement scarcity. Drain morale through uncertainty. Drain the state through constant workarounds. Because a workaround economy is an exhaustion economy. This is why sanctions are so dangerous. They operate like a slow leak in the hull. The ship doesn't sink in one dramatic moment. It just slowly stops being seaworthy. Now, one real-world moment makes this whole thing obvious. In 2022, after Russia invaded Ukraine, Western governments moved in a way that shocked central bankers everywhere. They restricted access to a large portion of Russia's foreign reserves held abroad and escalated financial restrictions across the system. Pause on what that means. Reserves are supposed to be the safest money a country has. The rainy day fund, the war chest. And overnight, the message wasn't, "We will fight you." It was, "You may not use what you thought you owned." That is sanctions in its purest form. Not destruction, denial. Not taking territory, taking access. And every government watching learned the same lesson Sun Tzu would have taught. If the battlefield is systems, the most powerful move is not to attack the enemy's army. It's to pull the plug on their ability to sustain it. Sun Tzu prized intelligence for one reason. It's cheaper than armies. Modern sanctions work best when paired with information advantage. Legal uncertainty, reputational risk, ambiguous red lines, compliance fear. The system doesn't have to punish every violation. It just has to make everyone afraid of being the example. So banks comply to avoid penalties. Insurers comply to avoid risk. Firms comply to protect supply chains. The enforcing power doesn't chase every transaction. It builds a world where everyone else does the policing. That is Sun Tzu's strategy. Win cheaply by making the environment do the work. Let's say you're a manufacturer in a sanctioned country. You don't need luxury goods. You need one boring thing. A part, a valve, a chip, a chemical additive, a machine tool. You used to buy it once a week. Now you need a third country intermediary. It has to be relabeled. The payment has to be routed through layers of caution. The insurer wants triple, and the shipping company refuses the route. So you pay more, wait longer, produce less. Multiply that across thousands of firms, across years. That's not policy, that's siege. No troops required. Sun Tzu would call this the cleanest victory, because it's cheaper than battle, and the enemy pays the bill. Now, let's steelman the best argument against this whole thesis. People say sanctions don't work. They point out targets adapt, black markets grow, elites get richer, civilians suffer, regimes survive anyway. That argument has truth in it. Sanctions rarely produce instant surrender, but here's the part most critics miss. Sanctions aren't always designed for surrender. Often they're designed for slowing growth, raising operational cost, limiting options, buying time, forcing trade-offs. That is still victory. Because in strategy, the goal isn't always to knock the opponent out. Sometimes the goal is to keep them from becoming stronger. Sun Tzu would understand that perfectly. Not every fight is about conquest. Some fights are about containment. Sun Tzu warned about prolonged war, not because he was impatient, because he was disciplined. Every extra day costs food, morale, and money. Sanctions turn time into an executioner. The longer the pressure persists, investment collapses, infrastructure decays, talent drains away, substitution becomes permanent, innovation slows, and short-term fixes turn into long-term weakness. This is why sanctions rarely look devastating early. They look survivable. Then the compounding starts. And compounding is merciless. If Section 1 was the philosophy, this section is the basement, the pipes, the wires, the switches. Because sanctions aren't just don't trade. They have control over access to critical infrastructure, payment rails, correspondent banking, insurance underwriting, shipping classification, licensing and standards, key tech ecosystems. The target isn't just punished, it's rooted around. It becomes expensive to touch. And the most sophisticated part is this: the enforcing power doesn't need to be everywhere. It needs to control the choke points. Because once the choke points are owned, enforcement becomes automatic. That's why this works. And that's why it scares states. Sun Tzu cared about morale, because morale determines endurance. Sanctions apply pressure that changes domestic psychology, frustration, blame, scapegoating, elite division, informal economies expanding, institutional decay. This is not just collateral damage, it's part of the design, because internal division is cheaper than external invasion and harder to defend against. Bring it back to the machine. Deny access, raise cost, fracture cohesion, force compliance, or exhaustion. Sun Tzu didn't teach leaders how to fight. He taught leaders how to win without destroying themselves. Modern sanctions are his philosophy executed with modern infrastructure. 1. Cut supply lines. 2. Increase cost per move. 3. Use information as leverage. 4. Let time compound the pressure. 5. Shift conflict inward. This is not modern innovation. It is an ancient strategy with digital tools. The sanctioning power doesn't need battlefield victory. It needs cost advantage. Because the side that applies pressure cheaply can use it longer. And the side that pays more per day eventually breaks. So is sanctions power unbeatable? No. It has one critical weakness. The system only works if the enforcing power can bear the collateral cost. Allies absorbing blowback, markets tolerating volatility, domestic industries accepting higher prices, political coalitions holding. In other words, the enforcing power can't just be strong, it has to be disciplined. Apply pressure too widely, too often, too carelessly, and you don't just strain the target, you strain yourself. And Sun Tzu's lesson comes full circle. The greatest threat isn't always the enemy, it's overextension. The world doesn't need to defeat you. It just needs you to defeat yourself. But that is a topic for another video. If you want the next chapter, stay tuned in.